Welcome to episode 6 of the build of my Mazda 606. This episode will go over most of the diff conversion, putting a Toyota F-Series diff into the back of it, retaining most of the factory 4-link and whatnot. So yeah, grab your tastiest beverage and sit down and take a watch. Here we have the 606 diff housing. So I've just got it out to have a bit of a measure to make some top and bottom arm brackets for this new diff. Now, so carrying on sort of the theme that I did in the front end, because I want to run this car so low, I really want to try and correct some suspension angles if we can. So the idea is, say if you were to lower the car 4 inches, 100mm, you would, if you could, you would drop that lower arm mounting there, you would drop that the same 100mm, and the top arm you would drop that 100mm. If you could do both that and you lowered the car 100mm, the suspension arms would be back into the same place they were before the car was lowered. So the bottom arm, or the bottom mount, that's easy enough to do. You can make some new brackets that are that much longer, but obviously with the top brackets you can't, because you're going to start obviously hitting the diff casing. And the other option is you can modify where those top arms bolt to the body, which in most cases is a little bit harder. But so the plan of attack for this is, the bottom mount, I'll lower that an undecided amount yet, but that'll come down a fair way. This top arm obviously can't come down that much before it starts to hit the diff casing, so that'll come down as far as I can get it. But in the body, the top arm on these 626s, I think I can actually re-drill and get it to maybe go up about maybe 50mm to stretch. So I may actually be able to get these 4-link arms back in a pretty good position. So yeah, that'll be the objective, to get them sort of close as we can to where they would be when they were original. There is a bit more that goes into it, obviously, about sort of getting correct angles for grip or squat or anti-squat or whatever, but just as a basic guideline, returning them as close to factory is always going to be a plus anyway. I have the diff that I'll be using all stripped. It's a Toyota F-Series live axle diff out of a Toyota Estima. Quite a lot wider than the 626, but pretty close to the track, or the new track width in the front. Now I've pulled the diff apart and start modifying all the pieces of it to get it to work in this Mazda. So this is obviously 5 stud, same PCD 4x114. So normally it's quite easy to re-drill, because you can use one of the studs being the same PCD but just different number of studs. But these 3 extra holes that this has got are actually causing quite a problem. If I slip this slip-on spacer on, which actually has holes for 4 stud, kind of quite hard to show here, but it never quite lines up without one of these 3 holes that are already drilled in it being where a stud would go. So I'm going to have to find the right orientation that there's the least amount of holes affecting it, and weld one of them up to then have the stud go through roughly where one of them is, which is a bit of a pain, but it's just something I have to deal with. First thing is to get these studs out. Little trick which might be obvious to lots, but you never know. Put one of your wheel nuts back on, wind it down till the top of the nut is flush with the bolt, and give it one good solid whack and you should get it out. One solid whack's far better than 3 or 4 half-assed whacks. So never beat on the end of the stud without a nut on there.
You got me working, and we're putting in every day. You got me working, and we're pushing it in every way. Yeah. You got me working, and we're putting in every day.
I've decided the whole circle is the one to weld. Ideally, actually, that hole there would have been better to weld. It would have meant some of the studs weren't so close to some of the other holes, but It's a big hole, and I'm a bit worried if I weld it up I might get a bit of warpage and shrinkage over there, so this is, well, that doesn't really look like it in this film. It's actually quite a bit smaller, that hole, and it's going to be a bit easier to weld up, so I'll go with that. So what I'll do here is I'll grind it up, take this chunk of brass, stick that under there, and then I can slowly weld the hole up. The reason you use a bit of brass is molten steel won't stick to it, so you can actually, so if you put a piece of steel under there you just simply weld it to it, but a piece of brass is perfect for the job.
Hey, you got me working, and we're pushing it in every way. Some have to hustle and some have to grind. Some get it easy.
Just gave the axles a quick face off in the lathe after welding those holes up, and used the lathe to scribe that PCD line around there, and now I'll use dividers to mark out the 4 stud pattern over the 5 and drill it, and away we go. So although this mill drill's a bloody handy machine to have, I can't actually re-drill the studs on these axles because there's nowhere for the axle to sit. It's obviously not enough height, so we'll go up to my my workshop trailer, and there's a drill press in there that will do the job. This is my workshop trailer behind my my new Z-powered Surf. This is actually how I make a living, doing pretty much on-site repair and engineering work. So it's got most things in it, either plug it into the mains or generator there, welder, compressor, good bench and vise, all my tools. There's a good little entrance into the back of it there if you ever need to take big things around, and all my consumables and power tools and hydraulic press, drill press, bench grinder, cut off saw. See, most things I need, but what we're here for is the drill press. This pedestal drill is actually, to be fair, even it's not really suited for this, but because I cut a hole in the bench there, an axle will slip through, so we can drill the axles here.
Some have it to grind, yeah. You got me working, 'cause money is time. Go on and get yours, 'cause no one's...
Axles are all done and studs are banged in. Now I'm going to move on to drilling the drums to suit. Now when you drill axles, you really got to be pretty accurate. Obviously, as that's how the wheel bolts on, but a lot of the times with drums or even with discs, you can actually afford to be a little bit out, although you might as well aim to be accurate, but if you are, it's not usually such a big deal. The reason being is the holes are actually oversized just to slip over the studs nicely, so, and because the drum actually locates with the centre bore there, yeah, the holes can be oversized, so if you get it off by ½ mil or something, it's not going to be the end of the world. So an easier way that I find to drill, either if you're drilling discs to a different stud pattern or drums like this, is rather than marking it out like I did with those, is to actually take something like this old disc, which I know is the stud pattern I want. I'll lay it over there, bolt up one of the 5 holes that'll bolt up right, locate it centrally, and then I'll just actually use this disc as a drilling pattern and just drill through the holes. And yeah, like I said, even if it's out by ½ mil, it's which it won't be anyway, but if it is, it's not going to be the end of the world, because it's just all it's got to do is slip over those studs. So I've got these bolted up, these discs bolted up to the drums. So I'm just going to drill those out to the 12.5 mil they are, and then re-drill them to 14.
Gonna hand it to you. No one's gonna give it to you. No one's gonna hand it to you. 'Cause no one's gonna hand it to you. grind on my shelf over time. Out for the apron, son. Catch them dreams done chasing, son. Proof in the basement, one. You slash hating, none. Yeah, gotta work that 9 to 5 just to make that nitty gritty. Please the peeps up in the city. Fuck that, I'ma get my own committee. Working, yeah, I'm out of the state for certain. So load the cars and pack the boots and turn this reggae roots
You
up.
got me working, and we're putting in every day. You got me working, and we're pushing it in every way. You got me working, and we're putting in every day. You got me working, and we're pushing it in every way. Well, some have to hustle, and some have to grind. Some get it easy, some have to do grind. You got me working, 'cause money is time. Go on and get yours, 'cause no one's gonna give it to you. 'Cause no one's gonna hand it to you. No one's gonna give it to you. No one's gonna hand it to you. Oh.
Here's the full-length plates all cut out and all drilled, ready to go. As you probably saw from the videos at the drill press, I bolted them all together as one unit, so then you can drill them all so that they're the same. And I used a hole saw to cut these half circles in it, which are the same size as the axle tube, so they simply go on nice and easy like that. You'll notice these bottom tabs, the lengths actually, obviously that circle there is where the axle tube is, so they're actually quite far behind the axle, which is how they are in the Mazda Diff, so I've just replicated it. And obviously got a few holes for adjustment, more than likely just run it on the bottom, but it's always good to have a bit of adjustability if we need to. And the top lengths, they're just one set hole obviously, but just as low as I can get them right down on top of the diff tube. To get these welded onto the diff, the technique I'm going to use is I will find a bit of RHS or something to go between these two plates. That's the right width for the full-length arms. Use a bolt to bolt them together so they're nice and square and the width we need. And I'll sit them on the diff housing, measured at the right width. I've actually, the diff housing is all cleaned up now, ground all the old mounts and welds off it. So bolt those together with a spacer of sorts, probably just a piece of RHS, and then what I'll do is I'll actually run a piece of round bar right the length of the diff between the holes, just so that all the mounts are all in the same line. You'll see what I mean once I get it all set up on there. I realise I've done some wrong measuring, which is bugging me. But so the problem that I've done, or the thing that I've done wrong, is I did mention that, well, this is the bottom mount, that the arm mounted quite far behind the centre line of the axle. Turns out when I was measuring it, it's actually the top length that does that, not the bottom, and I hadn't realised I had the diff housing upside down. So yeah, I ballsed that up, but anyway, we have to work around it. So I can modify these to suit, which is not a drama really, but the other problem I've actually realised that I didn't really compensate for is, I can probably describe it best with this chalk drawing here. So if that horizontal line there is the lower arm, with the bushes being those two circles, and say it's sitting in the car horizontal, just for argument's sake, if I bring the hole down vertically 100mm, when the arm actually comes down, it's actually going to want to bring the diff forward into the arch, which is not really that ideal. You can sort of counteract it with making adjustable arms, but I sort of want to get it, close enough to right to start. So the hole actually would need to be slightly further forward than if you just came straight down. But that also depends on where the arm starts from originally, and the height that I run the car, the arm's actually probably more on an angle like, you know, severely pointing down. So in that case, once it comes up higher, obviously not in that vertical plane, but the hole would actually need to be back there. So in short, really, what I'm trying to get at is that these holes here should actually be in an arc, and in the arc the arm would move at. They can still be drilled straight because the arc's actually not that big, but instead of being like that, they should actually either be on that line or down there, depending on where the arm wants to sit. So I'm going to have to modify these a little bit to work and actually try and get it, you know, so that these bolt holes sort of follow the arc of the arm a bit better. It's actually all worked out quite good. I've set the diff up in the car and had a look at where I want it to sit and arm angles and whatnot. I actually decided the diff, I'm just going to move it back slightly, back in the car, just for a bit more clearance and a few other bits and pieces. But anyway, these bottom links are going to work fine actually. So originally they were in that orientation with that being forward, so I can actually just flip them, and I'm just going to recut along that white line where the axle tube is. So yeah, my balls up didn't work out too badly really. So how it's going to sit pretty much is on that line drawing I did before. The arms are going to sit pretty close to horizontal, and then so there's a bit of those holes follow the arc pretty closely anyway. I think realistically though, the car's probably going to get put on the links will get put on those bottom holes and never change, unless I decide to raise the car quite a bit, which, if everything goes to plan, is highly unlikely. So yeah, so it's all going to work out good.
Ooh, oh, you got me running to the end of the block. Ooh, oh, you got me running and I don't want to stop. Ooh, oh, you got me running.
I've got the bottom mounts tacked on the diff there. As you can see, I use some 50mm RHS just clamped with the bolts to give it the right spacing, and this 14mm rod linking the two together keeps them nice and in line. So I just had it on the bench resting on bits of RHS and things that were the right size, just to place these where I needed, measuring them to get the centre line, the centre distance right, and the right distance from each end. So I've just tacked it on now, and I'll stick it in the car, sort of get a top arm bracket tacked on and see how it looks. I may need to take these off and move them a little touch, but we'll see how it goes. One of the big considerations as well about getting these in place is, if I can lift this up here, is getting the pinion angle correct. So that's the angle of the diff head, whether it's dipping down, flat, or pointing uphill. And as a general rule of thumb, the diff head should pretty much be pointing uphill on the same angle as the engine and gearbox, or thereabouts. I've got the diff housing back on the bench. I stuck it up in the car and had a look, had a bit of a think about it, and I wasn't quite happy with the pinion angle it had. And one thing you can normally do in a 4-link situation is to correct the pinion angle. You can just adjust the top and bottom arms just to get it right, but because these bottom mount brackets are so long, if I had have extended the top arms out to get the pinion angle right, it would have pushed the diff sort of too far back, and it wasn't going to work. So I pulled it back out, and I'm going to I'll change the angle they're sitting on. So I'll just show you this rather crude but effective way of sort of getting these on right. Well, the way I feel was right anyway. So I've got the diff casing sitting up on some RHS on the diff tubes. The reason I'm using RHS is for this sort of stuff anyway. You know, it's reasonably accurate. It's easy. It just, you know, things sit on it, and there's always plenty of offcuts, so it's nice and easy really. So yeah, the diff housing sitting up on two ends, and then I've got bits and pieces holding the casing at the pinion angle I want. and then same as before, the bottom arms clamped around 50mm with the bar keeping them true and in line. Cable ties are just simply to just give it a little pull together just to keep it nice and snug, rather than me trying to do it by hand. And yeah, this actually works quite well. It does look crude, but hey, as long as the job is done right at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how you do it. Got the diff housing back in place and jacked up. Sitting quite good, it's pretty centre of the guard. If you can see, maybe not, the back of the diff casing just clears the cross member bits back there. I've actually got it jacked up so it's bottomed out on the chassis rail as at the moment. That's probably likely going to be about right height, so I'm going to have to do a bit of notching up here to get some travel and whatnot. You can see the bottom arm there is pretty much sitting level, about as good as you're going to get it in a car like this, at this ride height. Obviously this lower arm, you know, to get that arm pointing uphill, you could bring that further down, but what you run into is that that'll eventually just be too close to the ground, and even there it's probably not too far away, but it'll be fine really. So I'm happy as with the pinion angle it's got at the moment, and I'll just show you how I sort of check it. So I got this level protractor thing here. I just sit it on the front pulley, get till the bubble's flat, set the straight edge up it, and as it shows, you can see it's about 4 degrees on there. Now the car's probably not sitting level, but for this it doesn't actually matter, because all we do is put that on the front of the motor, sitting at about 4 degrees, and then I go to the back, and there's no diff in there, but I can run a straight edge over the casing and stick that up against it, and ideally you want it the same as it is now. The diff's at about 3 degrees, so pretty close really, isn't it? Really quite hard to get a shot of this, but now that it's in place, what I'm going to do is you can just sort of see the top arm there. I'll sit the brackets on, and I won't tack it in place, but I'll mark where they want to sit, and pull the diff casing back out and tack them in place, but just by measuring so that they're bang on the right place. The reason I don't want to tack them in place there is because without a panhard bar or whatever hooked up at the moment, the diff might not actually be sitting central. So if I just mark where they want to be and then pull it out and then measure off the ends of the diff casing, I can get them sitting centre.
To the end of the block. Ooh, oh, you got me running and I don't wanna stop. You me running and me don't wanna stop. You me running and me don't wanna stop. Oh, you spend your life working it out, yeah.
That's the 4-link brackets all welded on. Just got to do the panhard bar bracket and eventually the coilover mounts. I'll rob the panhard mount off the 626 diff and I can weld that on in place. I really need to upgrade my welder actually, I think. This little Lincoln 170's pushed right to its limits with this sort of stuff. Gets the job done, but yeah, ideally a few more amps would help for sure. I just run CO2 gas through it, so that gives a bit more penetration, but yeah, maybe an upgrade's due. When you weld diff casings like this, you tend to cause a bit of distortion and warpage wherever you weld. Actually it shrinks, so the top mount there with the welds, it would have shrunk that top bit and can quite often cause the casing to bow. I probably could have gone to the effort of making a bit of a jig to hold it all straight, but at the end of the day, if it's a little bent, we can just use a bit of heat and shrink the opposite side and bring it back to straight, so it's not the end of the world for sure. I've just cut the panhard mount off the Mazda Diff, and it lines up quite well just to weld it to the back of one of the lower forelink mounts. It may not be dead centre, or the diff may not be dead centre in the car with it welded there, but I'm going to be making the panhard rod adjustable anyway, so it's a good spot for it, and it'll work out well with the adjustable panhard rod. Well, that's the diff basically put in, really. Still, if you can see there, still haven't got a diff head in it. There's still quite a bit of work to do to the body really before I can sort of start getting that stuff in. Because of the height I'm going to do it, it's most of the body above the diff head needs to be chopped out a bit. One thing to note, if I was sort of doing this to maybe a road going 626, that hump right there in the lower arm, that's actually where the coil spring goes on these from factory. I'm going to put coilovers in it, so I'll probably go off the top of the diff tube there up into the guard and make some towers. But with making these brackets lower, if you did this with the factory coil spring there, you'd actually, without changing the springs, you'd gain that much of a drop. So yeah, you could actually, I guess if you're retaining the factory setup, you could lower it quite effectively just by making lower brackets there. Before I can do the coilover mounts on the diff and the towers in the car, I need to sort of finalise the ride height really. So I need to get a wheel on there with the tyre I'm going to run. This guard's going to need to get cut right off. I'll be cutting it off to match that inner skin there, so it'll have as much clearance as it can. If we come in here, all that floor there is probably going to need to get raised a little bit, just to clear the top of the diff when it's nice and low. So yeah, really I've got to maybe take the wheels off the front and change the tyre, just so I can get a rough rolling height and cut this all out. Probably get it off the stands, back on the ground, and finalise how I want it to sit, and then I can start looking at getting the coilovers mounted. I thought I'd just put one of these front wheels on the back just for a quick look to see what it sits like without cutting the guard. It's going to be wide. That's an 8.5, and we're sort of probably going to end up about around 11. So yeah, add a few more on there, a few more inches on there. Thanks for tuning in to episode 6. I appreciate everyone watching all these videos and commenting, and yeah, it's real cool hearing good feedback about everything. Next episode or next lot of work to do really. Although I've said I'll pretty much be going with alloy wheels now, which I originally had decided not to, but just for brake clearance I'm going to have to do it. But for mock-up, I'm probably going to need, I need some rear wheels anyway, so might go over building some wide steels for the back. They don't quite clear the drums, the steel wheels, but they'll be good enough for mock-up, so probably just do some work on that, make a couple of wheels. My Starlet here needs a fair bit of work, so might take a little bit of a break from the Mazda and get a bit more of this done. It'd be also nice to get it out of the way so I can get my room back in the shed. But yeah, thanks for watching, and look out for the next one. Cheers.